There is a particular kind of quiet that a two-bedroom apartment has when the person who used to fill your house with noise has taken the children and the furniture and the framed photographs off the walls and left you with a lease and a forwarding address. I had been living in that quiet for 2 years when my body decided it had absorbed enough of it. March 17th, 2025. A Monday morning. I was doing what I do most mornings, walking the streets of the Cannonboro neighborhood in Charleston, South Carolina, watching the city come awake before 7, past the old Rutledge Avenue house where Carol now lived. I did not mean to walk past it. It was simply on the route I had walked for 20 years, and my feet had not gotten the message that the route was supposed to feel different now. I made it 3 blocks past the house before my chest did something that had no business doing at 7 in the morning on a clear March day. Not pain exactly, more like a conversation my heart was having with the rest of my body, without consulting me first. My legs followed immediately. The sidewalk came up faster than I expected. Tom Grady found me. Tom is 70 years old, a retired physician who lives 2 houses down from what used to be my address, and he was coming out to collect his newspaper when he saw me on the pavement. He called 911 before he even reached me, because 31 years of internal medicine teaches you to triage before you comfort. I woke up at Roper St. Francis Healthcare on Bon Secours Way with an IV in my arm and Tom sitting in the corner of the room, reading a magazine with the particular patience of a man who has waited out a great many uncertain mornings. "You're back." He set the magazine down. "What happened?" "Cardiac event. Not a full infarction. Your cardiologist will explain it better than I will. But Paul," he leaned forward, "you need to stop walking past that house." I almost laughed. "Almost? My name is Paul Foster. I am 50 years old, born in 1975, and I have spent the last 2 years living in a 2-bedroom apartment on Spring Street in Charleston, while the 4-bedroom federal-style home on Rutledge Avenue, the one I helped buy, helped renovate, helped fill with 21 years of a life I believed in, belongs to my ex-wife Carol." The divorce was finalized in January 2023. I was 47 years old and a senior partner at a civil litigation firm on Broad Street that I had helped build over 25 years. By the time the settlement was done, Carol had the house, valued at $890,000, my share of the firm partnership buyout, which came to $340,000, and primary influence over our 2 children. Nora, who was 19 at the time and sided with her mother with the conviction of someone who has heard one version of a story long enough to mistake it for the only version. And James, who was 16, stayed carefully neutral and called me every other week from his bedroom at the Rutledge Avenue house like a diplomat maintaining back-channel communications. Carol's last words to me at the conclusion of the settlement proceedings were delivered with the calm satisfaction of a woman who had gotten precisely what she wanted. "You build nothing that lasts, Paul. Not even this family." She was smiling when she said it. Not cruelly, which would have been easier to carry. Just satisfied. The way you smile when a long project concludes exactly as planned. I moved to Spring Street. I took my books, my clothes, my father's old watch, and a coffee maker. I left the photographs because the frames were part of the house and I did not want to negotiate over picture frames. I told myself I would replace them. I have not replaced them. The walls of the Spring Street apartment are, after 2 years, still bare. I want to tell you something about losing a marriage at 47. There is the practical loss, the house, the money, the daily presence of your children. Those losses are real, and they are large. But the thing that actually empties you is smaller than any of those. It is the loss of the version of yourself that the marriage contained. The person who lived in that house and ate at that table and believed on most mornings that things were fundamentally all right. That person does not survive the settlement intact. You carry what remains of him into a 2-bedroom apartment on Spring Street, and you try, with varying success, to introduce him to his new circumstances. I was 50 years old, consulting part-time from a desk near the window, walking the same route every morning past the life I used to have, when my chest interrupted that particular routine on a Monday in March. Dr. Linda Marsh is my cardiologist at Roper St. Francis, 52 years old, precise, with the particular directness of a physician who respects her patients enough not to soften things unnecessarily. She explained what had happened with the clarity I appreciated. An arrhythmia, an irregular heart rhythm, had triggered the episode. Not a heart attack, but a serious warning. The kind of event that requires investigation, monitoring, and a frank conversation about stress management that I sat through with the expression of a man who has been a litigator for 25 years and therefore has complicated feelings about being lectured. Your biological family cardiac history. Dr. Marsh reviewed the intake form without looking up. You've written unknown. I was adopted, I said. My adoptive parents are both deceased. I don't have biological family medical history. Dr. Marsh made a note. In that case, I'm going to refer you to the cardiac genetics program at MUSC. It's standard protocol for arrhythmia patients with unknown biological history. They screen for hereditary conditions. Certain arrhythmia types have a genetic component we'd want to identify. The Medical University of South Carolina sits on Ashley Avenue, about a mile from Roper St. Francis. It is one of the oldest medical schools in the country, founded in 1824, and its cardiac genetics research program is among the most respected in the Southeast. I knew of it. 25 years in Charleston civil litigation means you know the institutions. I said yes to the referral, with the minimal resistance of a man who has recently collapsed on a public sidewalk, and is therefore not in the strongest position to decline medical advice. What Dr. Marsh did not know, what nobody knew except Frank Calhoun and Tom Grady, was what was locked in the top drawer of my desk at the Spring Street apartment. A file folder. Brown, legal size. 11 years old. Here is where the story gets complicated. And here is where I need to go back. Not far, but far enough. In 2013, I was 38 years old and in the middle of clearing my adoptive mother Helen's house after her diagnosis. Helen Foster was the most organized woman I have ever known. A retired school teacher who kept every document, every receipt, every piece of correspondence in labeled folders in a bureau in her bedroom, arranged by year and category with a precision that I recognized in myself and had always attributed to upbringing. In the bottom drawer of that bureau, behind the tax records and the insurance policies and the Christmas card lists going back to 1971, was a sealed envelope. My name was on the front, in Helen's handwriting, with a single instruction beneath it. When you are ready. I sat on the edge of Helen's bed and held it for a long time before I opened it. Inside, my original birth certificate, listing my biological mother as Margaret Collins, age 19, of Charleston, South Carolina. Biological father, listed as unknown. Beneath that, adoption papers processed through a private Charleston attorney in November 1975. And beneath that, a single folded note on plain white paper in handwriting I did not recognize. Small and careful, the handwriting of someone pressing hard to keep their letters steady. Paul, I hope you are well and happy, and that life has been kind to you. I could not keep you, and I have never stopped being sorry for it. Your father did not know about you until it was too late to matter. He was a good man in a complicated situation, and he spent a long time looking for you after. I hope someday you find each other. With love, always, Margaret. I read that note 4 times. Then I folded it back into the envelope and sat with it for a while in Helen's quiet house, listening to the particular silence of a room that belongs to someone who is still alive, but no longer fully present. The following year, 2014, I hired a private investigator named Dale Hooper, a former Charleston police detective who worked civil cases with the methodical patience of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what families conceal. I gave him the birth certificate and the note, and 3 weeks. Dale found Edward Harlow in 11 days. Edward Harlow, founder of Harlow Maritime Holdings, established 1971, Charleston-based shipping and maritime logistics company, and a well-chosen one, given that Charleston is the 4th busiest container port in the United States. By 2014, Harlow Maritime Holdings had grown into a regional powerhouse with contracts across the Southeast. Edward Harlow was 73 years old, a widower, and lived in a large house in the south of Broad neighborhood on Trad Street. He had, according to Dale's research, never had other children. He had been married once, for 31 years, to a woman named Patricia, who had passed in 2011. He had, beginning sometime in the 1990s, made periodic quiet inquiries through an attorney about a child placed for adoption in Charleston in November 1975. The inquiries had never produced a result. I read the file. I sat with it. I thought about calling the number Dale had found, a direct line to Harlow Maritime's executive offices, where Edward Harlow still came in 3 days a week. And then I put the file in a drawer and did not call. I want to be honest about why, because this is the part of the story that requires honesty. I was 39 years old. I had a wife, 2 children, a career I had built from nothing, and a version of my identity that had been constructed carefully over a lifetime without the knowledge of where it had originally come from. The idea of introducing a 73-year-old biological father into that structure, a man I did not know, who might want things I was not prepared to give, felt like a renovation I was not ready to undertake. So I chose not to. I kept the file. I told myself I would return to it when the timing was better. The timing was never better. Life moved. The marriage became something else. Helen died in 2016. Richard, my adoptive father, had died in 2009. The file sat in the drawer. In March 2020, Edward Harlow died. He was 79 years old. I read the obituary in the Post and Courier on a Tuesday morning and sat with my coffee and did not call anyone. His estate, the obituary noted, would be managed by Harlow Maritime's board pending resolution of his testamentary instructions. I knew what that meant. Dale had found in his research that Harlow's will contained provisions for a biological heir, a DNA verification clause. If his son was identified, the estate would pass to him. If not, after a period of 5 years, it would be distributed to charitable trusts. 5 years from March 2020 was March 2025. I was 50 years old when my chest made its decision on a Monday morning sidewalk. I was 50 years old when the referral to MUSC's cardiac genetics program set in motion the thing I had been sitting next to for 11 years. And I didn't know it yet, but the 5-year clock on Edward Harlow's estate had exactly 12 days left to run. Dr. Kevin Walsh is a genetic counselor at MUSC's cardiac hereditary disease program. 44 years old, methodical, with the careful manner of a man who delivers complicated information for a living and has learned to pace himself accordingly. I sat across from him in his office on Ashley Avenue on a Thursday afternoon. In late March, 10 days after the collapse. He had my referral notes, my medical history as far as it could be reconstructed, and the results of the initial genetic screening the program had run. Mr. Foster. He set a folder on the desk between us. The screening flagged a hereditary arrhythmia marker, KCNQ1 gene variant. It's associated with long QT syndrome, a condition that affects the heart's electrical system and can cause exactly the kind of episode you experienced. He paused. The reason this matters beyond your own treatment is that it's inherited. We like to know the family history. Who else might carry it, whether your children should be screened? I've been adopted. I know. Which is why I ran your profile through the program's research database. He paused again, in the way of someone choosing words with intention. Mr. Foster, the database includes genetic profiles contributed by participants in our hereditary cardiac research going back to 2018. One of those participants was a man named Edward Harlow. He contributed his profile because he carried the same KCNQ1 variant and wanted to assist with the research. A longer pause. His profile matches yours at a level consistent with a first-degree biological relative, specifically a parent-child relationship. I looked at the folder on the desk between us. Edward Harlow, I said. Doctor? Walsh looked up from his notes. You know the name. I have a file on him at home, I said. I've had it for 11 years. The silence in that office was the particular silence of a moment that has been a long time arriving. Mr. Foster, Dr. Walsh said carefully, are you aware that Mr. Harlow's estate has a DNA verification clause, she said, and a 5-year clock that has approximately 12 days remaining. Dr. Walsh sat back in his chair. I need to call my attorney, I said, today. Frank Calhoun has been my personal attorney for 22 years. His office sits on Broad Street in a building that was constructed in 1887 and has been a law office for most of its life. He is 65 years old, meticulous, and has the particular quality of a man who has practiced law long enough to be unsurprised by almost anything a client brings through his door. I called him from the MUSC parking lot. "Frank, I need to come in. Today, if possible. I have a 4 o'clock. A pause. How urgent is this? There is a DNA-verified inheritance with a 5-year estate clock that expires in 12 days, I said. Edward Harlow's estate. $47 million, approximately. I have been aware of my biological connection to him since 2014, and have not acted on it. I need to know what I need to do, and I need to know it before the end of this week." A longer pause than I usually get from Frank Calhoun. Paul. A pause. "Come in at 2. I'm moving to 4 o'clock. I want to explain something here because it is the part of this story that requires the most care, both legally and personally. In 2014, when Dale Hooper's research identified Edward Harlow as my biological father, I was 8 years away from the divorce proceedings that would begin in 2022. I was a married man with 2 children, a functioning career, and no immediate reason to disrupt my life by pursuing a connection I was not emotionally prepared for. The file went in the drawer. The choice not to act was real, considered, and entirely mine. But here is the legal reality that matters. By choosing not to act, I did not acquire anything. A contingent future interest, which is what the DNA verification clause in Harlow's will created, is not an asset. It is a possibility, a contingency, something that might become real if certain conditions were met, but which has no present value until those conditions occur. Under South Carolina law, and I know South Carolina law, having practiced it for 25 years, a contingent future interest is not a marital asset subject to equitable distribution in a divorce proceeding. Carol's attorneys had access to my financial disclosures. Those disclosures accurately reflected my assets as they existed at the time of the settlement. A file folder in a desk drawer containing research about a biological father whose will contained a DNA verification clause was not an asset. It was information about a possibility I had not chosen to pursue. Frank confirmed this within the first 30 minutes of our meeting, with the measured certainty of a man who had already started pulling the relevant case law before I arrived. The claim exposure is minimal, but it exists. If Carol's attorneys are sharp, they will argue you had a duty to disclose the potential inheritance as a material asset. We will counter that a contingent future interest dependent on your voluntary action you had declined to take for 11 years, does not meet the definition of a marital asset under settled South Carolina doctrine. The cases support us. What's the first step? I asked. Contact the Harlow estate attorneys. Today. The clock has 11 days. We need to initiate the DNA verification process before the 5-year period closes. The Harlow estate had been managed since March 2020 by an attorney named Robert Keene at a firm on Meeting Street in Charleston. Frank called Robert Keene while I sat in the chair across from his desk. The conversation was brief, professional, and ended with an appointment for the following morning to begin the verification process at MUSC, using the genetic profile Dr. Walsh had already established. The formal DNA comparison between my profile and Edward Harlow's contributed research sample took 48 hours. The result, 99.8% probability of biological paternity. Frank filed the verification with the Harlow estate on April 2, 2025, 9 days before the 5-year clock would have closed. The estate, Harlow Maritime Holdings, valued at $47 million, including the company's equity, real estate holdings, and investment accounts, passed to me as Edward Harlow's sole biological heir. I am going to tell you something that I did not expect to feel when Frank called with the confirmation. Not triumph, not relief. Something quieter and more complicated. The particular weight of a door opening that you had chosen to keep shut for 11 years, and standing in the threshold not knowing whether what is on the other side is what you needed or simply what you had avoided. Edward Harlow was 79 years old when he died. He had spent decades making quiet inquiries about a son he could not find. He had enrolled in a research database at MUSC in 2018, contributing his genetic profile, in part because of his cardiac condition, and in part, this is what Robert Keene told me, who had known Harlow personally, because he harbored a quiet hope that if his son ever ended up in a medical system that used that database, something might connect. He had used the only door available to him. I had used the same door, 11 years too late to meet him. I thought about that for a long time. I am still thinking about it. If you've been listening for a while and want stories like this to keep coming, it really helps if you hit that like button and subscribe. 97% of people never do, but it's what keeps this whole thing running. So, thank you. Carol found out in May. I did not know exactly how. Charleston is not a large city in the way that matters. The legal and professional community is a specific world with specific channels. And a $47 million estate verification involving a known local attorney and a recognizable family name moves through those channels. By the second week of May, 6 weeks after the verification was filed, Frank received a motion from Carol's attorney. Emergency motion for post-decree relief, filed in Charleston Family Court. The argument was exactly what Frank had anticipated. Carol's attorneys contended that Paul Foster had possessed material knowledge of a potential inheritance during the divorce proceedings and had failed to disclose it, constituting fraudulent concealment of a marital asset. They sought a court order compelling me to share a portion of the Harlow estate consistent with what Carol would have received had the asset been disclosed at the time of settlement. I read the motion at Frank's office on a Tuesday afternoon. Frank watched me read it with the expression of a man who has already prepared the response and is waiting for his client to finish processing the emotional component before they move to the legal one. "How do you want to handle this?" he asked when I set it down. "I want to win," I said, cleanly. "Then let me explain exactly why we will." Here is what Frank argued in his response, and here is what I want every person listening to understand, because this is the educational part of the story, and it matters. A contingent future interest is not a marital asset. South Carolina follows the principle of equitable distribution, which divides marital assets, property, and financial interests that exist and have present value at the time of the marital estate. A contingent future interest is a legal category describing something that might become real only if certain voluntary conditions are met. In this case, my voluntary decision to submit to DNA verification and claim the inheritance. Until that decision was made, there was no asset. There was a possibility, dependent entirely on my choice. Carol's attorneys argued that I knew the inheritance existed and suppressed that knowledge. Frank's response was precise. I knew about a file. I knew about a research connection. I had chosen for 11 years and for documented personal reasons not to pursue it. That choice was mine to make. The existence of an unclaimed contingent interest does not create a disclosure obligation in divorce proceedings, particularly when the interest depends on the claiming party's voluntary action. He cited 3 South Carolina appellate decisions directly on point. He attached a timeline of every action I had taken, and every action I had deliberately not taken, from 2014 through the divorce settlement through the March 2025 collapse. The timeline was meticulous, documented, and left no interpretive room. The motion was heard in Charleston Family Court on June 3, 2025. The judge denied Carol's motion from the bench. She did not reserve decision or request additional briefing. She read Frank's response, heard oral argument for 40 minutes, and ruled. The Harlow estate belonged entirely to Paul Foster. Carol's claim had no legal basis under settled South Carolina law. The motion was denied with prejudice, meaning it could not be refiled. Frank and I walked out of the courthouse on Broad Street into a June afternoon in Charleston. Warm, salt-edged, the harbor visible at the end of the street where the Cooper River met the sky. He shook my hand on the courthouse steps. Clean, clean, I agreed. I didn't know what came next, but I knew what I wanted to do with it. My adoptive mother's name was Helen Foster. She was a retired school teacher, 31 years in the Charleston County School District, teaching 4th grade with the particular patience of someone who genuinely believed that every child in the room was worth the effort. She died in 2016. At 71, after a brief illness she declined to make a fuss about. She was the most organized woman I have ever known and the most quietly generous, and she kept a sealed envelope in the bottom of her bureau for years, addressed to me, with a single instruction on the front. When you are ready. She had known, for my entire life, that someday I might be ready. She had prepared for it with the same methodical care she brought to everything, not forcing it, not hiding it, just keeping it safe until the right moment found me. I thought about that for a long time after the court ruling. I thought about what it means to build something, not in the abstract, in the literal sense. What you construct deliberately, brick by brick, over years, that is designed to outlast you. Helen had built that, a sealed envelope in a bureau. A note she trusted would reach me when I needed it. She had been right. Edward Harlow had built something too. A contribution to a genetics database in 2018, made partly for medical reasons and partly on a quiet hope. He had been right as well. In the third week of June 2025, I met with the dean of the Charleston School of Law, a real institution, established in 2004 that has become one of South Carolina's premier legal education programs. I made an endowment, the Helen Foster Chair in Civil Justice, funded by the Harlow estate, named after the woman who raised me, not the man whose money made it possible. Because what Helen Foster gave me was not money. It was the law. She had insisted on it. She had driven me to every campus visit, read every law school application, sat in the gallery the day I was admitted to the South Carolina bar. The chair would fund a professorship in civil litigation and public access to justice, the kind of law I had spent 25 years practicing. The announcement ran in the Post and Courier on June 22, 2025, a Monday. Full name, photograph, endowment amount. Frank had suggested keeping a lower profile. I had considered it. Then I thought about what Carol had said on the day the divorce was finalized, with that satisfied smile, and I decided that a lower profile was unnecessary. You built nothing that lasts. Paul. The announcement ran on a Monday. Carol called on a Wednesday. I was at my desk on Spring Street, the same desk where the brown file folder had sat in the top drawer for 11 years, when the phone rang. Her number. I had not blocked it because we have 2 children and blocking their mother's number is not something a reasonable person does regardless of the circumstances. I answered, Paul. Her voice had none of the satisfaction I remembered from the settlement proceedings, something else entirely, something that had taken her 2 days to collect herself enough to make this call. Carol. I saw the announcement. I imagine a few people did. A pause. How long have you known about the inheritance? Since 2014, I said. 11 years. Another pause. Longer. And you just didn't claim it. I wasn't ready, I said. And then the timing never seemed right. And then he died. And then we divorced. I let a beat pass. And then my chest made a decision that I'd been putting off, and a genetic counselor at MUSC made a connection that had been available for 7 years. And here we are. The chair. Her voice shifted slightly. You named it after your mother. After Helen. I said, yes. Not after him. Not after Harlow. No. Why not? I thought about how to answer that. Not because I didn't know. I knew exactly. But because I wanted to say it correctly. The way I had learned over 25 years to say the things that needed to land cleanly. Because what Helen gave me is what made it possible to use what he left me, I said. She gave me the discipline to build a career, the values to practice law honestly, the stability to raise 2 children. Edward Harlow left me money. Helen Foster left me something that lasts. The silence on the phone was not empty. It was full of something Carol was working through in real time. Paul. I'm not interested in relitigating the settlement, I said. The court ruled. That's done. I'm telling you this because you called and you asked, and I believe you deserve a straight answer. I said something cruel. A pause. At the settlement. You did. I meant it at the time. I know you did. I'm not sure I meant it the way it landed. I thought about that for a moment, about the difference between what a person means and what a person says, and how rarely those 2 things occupy the same sentence cleanly. Carol, I said, I built 25 years of a law career. I built a relationship with my children that survived a divorce. I built enough of a life in a 2-bedroom apartment on Spring Street that when my body gave out on a Monday morning, a neighbor who had known me for years came out of his house and called for help before he even reached me. I paused. What lasts is not always the thing you can measure. Sometimes it's the thing you chose to keep doing when the measuring stopped making sense. She didn't say anything for a while. "How are Nora and James?" I asked. "Nora wants to call you. She's been working through some things since the announcement. She knows where to find me. James asked if he could come down from Clemson this weekend. I'll make dinner," I said. "Tell him Saturday." We ended the call without warmth exactly, but without the residue of the settlement proceedings either. Something more like two people who had been through something difficult together and were trying, imperfectly and at their own pace, to locate the version of each other that existed before the difficult thing happened. I am not sure that version still exists, but I am not sure it doesn't. Now I want to talk to you directly, because there are things in this story that matter beyond the narrative itself. The first is adoption and genetic identity. In the United States, approximately 135,000 children are adopted each year. An estimated 6 to 7 million Americans are adoptees. A significant number of those individuals have limited or no access to their biological family medical history, which creates real clinical challenges, particularly for conditions with hereditary components. Long QT syndrome, the arrhythmia condition identified in my case, affects approximately 1 in 2,000 people and is frequently inherited. Knowing your biological cardiac history is not a curiosity. It is clinically relevant information that can affect diagnosis, treatment, and the decision to screen biological children. The MUSC Cardiac Genetics Program, and programs like it at academic medical centers across the country, exist precisely because this gap in medical history is common and consequential. If you are an adoptee and you experience an unexplained cardiac event, ask your physician specifically about hereditary arrhythmia screening and whether your facility has a cardiac genetics research program. The second is the legal concept at the center of Carol's claim, the contingent future interest. A contingent future interest is a potential right to property that becomes real only if specific conditions are met. In the context of a will with a DNA verification clause, the heir must take a voluntary action, submitting to testing, for the inheritance to materialize. Until that action is taken, nothing exists. A possibility is not an asset. A file folder containing research about a potential biological connection is not a bank account. South Carolina divorce law, like most equitable distribution states, divides marital assets, property with present definable value that exists during the marriage. An interest that depends entirely on your voluntary future action, which you have consistently declined to exercise, does not meet that definition. The case law on this point is settled. Frank's response to Carol's motion cited 3 directly controlling appellate decisions. If you are going through a divorce and you have a contingent interest of any kind, an inheritance dependent on conditions not yet met, a potential claim not yet filed, a business interest not yet vested, speak to your attorney about how that interest is classified under your state's equitable distribution law before signing anything. The third thing I want to say is personal. I had a file in a drawer for 11 years. A connection I could have pursued and chose not to. There is no version of this story where that choice was wrong. I made it with the information and the emotional readiness I had at the time, and I do not spend energy reconsidering it. But I also do not spend energy pretending the cost of it was zero. Edward Harlow spent years looking for a son who had, by 2018, found him and chosen to stay at a distance. He died not knowing that his son had read the file and set it aside. I will carry that. What I do with it is the only thing I can control now. The Helen Foster Chair will fund a professorship at the Charleston School of Law for as long as the endowment holds. The first recipient of the chair will teach civil procedure and access to justice, the kind of law that determines whether ordinary people can navigate a legal system that was not designed with them in mind. Helen would have wanted that. I am confident of it. James came to dinner on Saturday. He is 19 years old and a freshman at Clemson University, and he has grown since I last saw him at Thanksgiving, approximately 2 inches that I was not informed about. He ate 3 portions of the shrimp and grits I made, a recipe from a restaurant on East Bay Street that I have been attempting to replicate for 4 years with mixed results, and told me about his computer science coursework with the particular enthusiasm of someone who has found the thing they are going to do with their life. At the end of the evening, he stood at the door of the Spring Street apartment and looked around at the bare walls and the way young people look at things they are trying to understand. You should put some pictures up, Dad. I've been meaning to, I said. I could help. He looked at me with Carol's eyes, which he has always had, but with something of his own behind them. Next weekend, maybe? Nora said she might come too. I thought about Helen's sealed envelope, about the note from Margaret Collins, careful and pressing hard to keep her letters steady, about a man named Edward Harlow who put his DNA in a database in 2018, on a quiet hope. Next weekend, I said. I'll get the frames. He hugged me on the way out, the slightly awkward hug of a 19-year-old who is relearning how to do it, and I stood in the doorway of the Spring Street apartment and watched him walk down the stairs. The walls are still bare, but not for much longer. Carol said I built nothing that lasts. She was talking about the house, the money, the outward architecture of a life that the settlement had rearranged. She was not entirely wrong about those things, but there is a chair at the Charleston School of Law with my mother's name on it that will outlast every building I have ever lived in. There are 2 children who are finding their way back. There is a file folder that sat in a drawer for 11 years and turned out to be exactly the right thing at exactly the right moment, because a collapse on a Monday morning led to a referral that led to a match that led to 11 days of action that changed the entire structure of what comes next. Sometimes the door you chose not to open is waiting for you. Sometimes the timing it was waiting for is yours. I am Paul Foster. I am 50 years old. I am a former senior litigation partner, a current part-time consultant, a father of 2, and as of April 2nd, 2025, the sole heir of the Harlow estate. I am also, finally, ready. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.